All right. Let's read. There are four versions of the account of Jesus feeding the 5,000. As is usually true, when you look at an account across the Gospels, there will be some details that are different. It's not a matter of contradiction, it's a matter of perspective and really intent for the story. Each reading of the 5,000 comes at a different point in the Gospel and kind of with a different idea in mind, but it all highlights the same event. The two I want to read with you this morning are the ones found in Mark 6 and John 6. They're similar, but there are some key details that I think between these two we'll be able to get most of what's there. Before we do that, as we turn to Mark 6, I kind of just wanted to put this out there to you and see what sort of the opinion of the group is. What are the events of Jesus' life that are recorded in all four Gospels? And what I mean by that is, which events, when you point to them, you can find it written in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Not every event is like that. Case in point, Jesus' birth. His birth narrative is not included in Mark, and it's not included in John. Okay? So, which events, one of them I just told you, so that's easy. Which events are recorded in all four Gospels? Which ones would you say? Well, first of all, the baptism, right? Well, we'll just do this one together. Jesus' baptism, right? Matthew 4 and the other three accounts. All four Gospels at least record, or in John's case, describe the event. John doesn't describe it as it's happening. He kind of describes it after the fact, but it's still there. Jesus' feeding of the 5,000 is covered in all four Gospels. What else would you say?
Death, burial, and resurrection.
Okay, the death and the burial and the resurrection are all given as in all four of those versions. All right. What else? I don't think walking on the water is. I don't think John includes walking on the water. Well, John does. Luke does not. Okay, Luke's the one that leaves that one out. All right. What other events you think? And the reason why I bring this up is these are significant events. If it's important enough that all four of them mention it, that kind of gives some weight to the event itself, right? Obviously, the crucifixion being a big one. What else do you think? Someone else might be recorded in all four Gospels. Big, important events in Jesus' life or in the story. This is one of those sit and stare type mornings, right? Sit and get, buffet style. What do you think? What's that? The death of John the Baptist. I don't think that one's in all four either. All right. Here's another one. Jesus coming into Jerusalem. The triumphal entry, we call this. Right. Remember, he rides into Jerusalem on a colt, and there's shouts of Hosanna, and they're basically trying to make him. They're praising him as a king and as a prophet. Okay. Any other events?
The Lord's Supper?
Yep. The events surrounding the Lord's Supper, or at very least Passover,
Passover.
right? John is the one that kind of gives the least amount of detail as to the Lord's Supper per se. It just sort of starts in 14 and says, as they gathered for Passover, and then at the end of 17, they're done with it, they sing a hymn and they leave. But that context is definitely Passover, all right? What would come next in the story? What happens that's really important during the Passover in terms of the story of Jesus' life? Jesus is betrayed by Judas Iscariot. That's recorded in all four, some version of it, okay? What else happens in that scene that's kind of important? Peter and the rest of the disciples, they say something.
I was going to say Peter denies Jesus.
The fact that he denies Jesus is recorded, but what does he do before he denies Jesus? He says, I'm not going to deny Jesus. Him and all the rest of the disciples say, some version of, we will never deny you. Peter's especially recorded in all four. What happens next in the story? They get up and they go to the Garden of Eden, right? Gethsemane is all four. Are you noticing a trend? Right? What do most of the gospel accounts focus on? It's the last day of his life, right? These events are recorded are in all four versions of the telling of Jesus' life. Now, the events that happened before the final day are sort of selected based on what the gospel writer is trying to do, right? If Matthew, he's trying to select things that would appeal to a Jewish audience. If it's Luke, maybe something else. If it's John, there's another reason altogether. But the most important events in Jesus' life happen in the final day. And if you count the resurrection, the final 3 days. Right? The death, the burial, the resurrection, that's the gospel story. That's the core, the kernel of it. Right? And you can see that based on which accounts are all together. Okay, the text. Let's read Mark 6. We're going to begin in verse 30. If I could get 30 to 36 and then 37 to 40. Okay, 30 to 36. Okay, go ahead, please. Yes, please.
The apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest a while, for there were many people coming and going, and did not even have time to eat." They went away in the boat to a secluded place by themselves. The people saw them going, and many recognized them, and ran there together on foot from all the cities, and got there ahead of them. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a large crowd, and he felt compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He began to teach them many things. When it was already quite late, his disciples came to him and said, "This place is desolate, and it is already quite late. Send them away, so that they may go into the surrounding countryside of villages and buy themselves something to eat."
Okay, 37 to 44, please. Who we got? Okay, Ryan, go ahead.
But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them?" He said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found it, they said, 5 and 2 fish. He commanded all of them to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and he said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces and fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000.
Okay. Now let's read and compare that and kind of combine that with John 6. Okay, John 6, 1 to 9. If I could get a new reader. Okay, 1 through 9, please.
After this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up to the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to get a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?"
Okay, 10 to 15. One more, please. All right, go ahead.
Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world."
And 15 also.
Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone.
All right. Super interesting account. This is one of those accounts that has echoes of things from the past, and it's precursors to things you're going to see in the future. It's establishment of who he is. There's an incredible miracle. They're all incredible, but there's some that are more impactful, impressive, whatever you want to put with it, than others, and this is one of those cases. Okay, let's get the basics out of the story. Why did the crowd come together? What was it that drew them together? What's that?
They were following Jesus.
Okay, they were following him. All right, someone want to add to that? Why? Why in this one?
They saw him healing the sick.
Okay, so there's following him, and there's, hey, we saw, the leper and the other things that happened, right? Perhaps even reports of him raising the dead, casting out demons, all those sorts of things kind of stirring together. He's really gaining, he's gaining a fan base, you might say. People who know him and have heard the stories, all right? Why did he begin to teach them? Luke wasn't it Mark that was emphasized the teaching aspect of it? John sort of maybe alludes to it. He went up on the mountain and sat down with his disciples. That's sort of a teaching sort of thing. But Mark was the one that described why did he begin to teach them.
He had compassion.
He had compassion on them. All right, now someone else.
They were like sheep without a shepherd.
Okay,
They were lost.
I have quoted that verse and used it in sermons and whatever, but for whatever reason never tied together that is in the context of him feeding the 5,000. Right? That verse about he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, that's in the context of feeding them, right? So you can think about, of course, there's Jesus going to feed them, but if Jesus is the good shepherd, he's able to pull food from his sheep out of nowhere, right? No shepherd on earth could just make the grass grow. This one could. He could make food just proliferate for his sheep, right? But before he gives them the physical food, what does he do first? He gives them spiritual food, right? Jesus, in another context, says, my food is to do the will of him who sent me, right? And remember the woman at the well in John 4? John 6, what's he doing? He's now feeding by way of word, by way of teaching, and then follows that up with taking care of physical needs. Jesus addressed the spiritual usually before he addressed the physical. Okay? How much food did they find? 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Whose food was it? It's a small child. You ever wonder if you're the little kid? Like, hey man. You can see the little kid. My mommy gave me this to go see the prophet. And you're gonna,
Yeah.
it's all they could find was the little kid. He was the only one who packed his lunch that day.
Yeah.
All right. It's just, or maybe nobody else gave him food. I don't know.
He's the only one prepared.
Something, right? Yeah.
Think about what the crowd did though. If Jesus and his disciples are going across the Sea of Galilee by boat, all right, it's 5 miles across, okay? So it's possible for you to go around, but they went around the lake to meet him. They had to have been hoofing it. I mean, those people had to be moving to be able to be there when he got up. So you didn't have time for food or anything else for that matter. You were busy traveling.
What's somewhere in the area of what? A little over 6 miles to huff it around, 6 or 7. If it's 5 miles, something like that. It's a ride.
So it's 1.7,
Yeah.
3.14 and a half.
However far it is across. This is a long way, right? For them to kind of make it all the way around by the time he gets on the other side. How much food was left over according to both accounts? 12 baskets full of fragments and of pieces of the fish, right? They had more baskets than they had individual items of food when they got done. If they had 7, it'd be like, okay, kind of 12 baskets full of the pieces. It's like, it doesn't make sense because it's nonsensical, and miracles typically are. Things happen that are quite impossible. How many people were fed? There's a good answer and there's a better answer.
More than 5,000.
All right, the good answer is 5,000 men, because that's what the text says. The better answer is
All of them.
all of them. It's the best answer. There you go. That was beyond even where I was headed. All right, but 5,000 men would imply what? Probably more, right? This was not, the Freemasons where it's only the dudes, okay? This is men. There's obviously a child there. So, boy running along without his mother, it could be 10,000, it could be plus. However many people there were, right? And they were made to sit down in groups of 50 and groups of 100. right? If nothing else, then just to keep up with them, right? Organizational type thing.
I was gonna say, that would be for distribution of the food. You would hand a basket to somebody who would then go around and see that everybody in that group got fed.
Yeah. A sense of how much food that they realized they would need to buy. Philip, I love him in verse 7. In John 6, 200 denarii worth of bread. Put that in a modern figure. How much money is that? Just ballpark it.
200 days worth, a denarii was a day's wage for a common laborer.
So slightly, well, over half a year's pay. So how much money are we talking about?
Say 40 grand.
Minimum, right? Or is it somewhere around that, right? 40 grand worth of food. That points, I think, to the crowd size as well, right? I think you can feed 5,000 men for less than 40 grand. I'm not a caterer, but I think that's possible. There's a bunch of people here, right? And you want us to go buy, 200 denarii would not be enough for each of them to get even a little. Philip's like, this is not a 5-course meal. They're not even going to get enough to get by. And yet, he does this. All right, big threads from the story. Tell me what in the two accounts that we read points to Jesus being a king. What details in the story point you in that direction? There's a big one at the end of John, the one in John 6. They were going to come and take him in verse 15 and do what with him? They were going to make him king whether he wanted to or not. I always wondered how you do that. You're going to take this guy and make him king by force? What do you mean by that? Mean they're going to force Jesus to be king? What does it mean then that they're going to make him king by force?
And tie this together with the death of John. John is dead. Herod did it. It's time to overthrow Herod.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the motive of the people, because it mentions that Jesus got news that John had died, and the people knew that John had died. The word was out. John had been beheaded, and at Herod's hand. And so the people are of a mind, this is the event that tells us it's time to get rid of him.
Yeah. They're going to take their king, and they're going to make him king. It's time to get going. What sort of king would Jesus have been? Maybe it points to the reason why they would have done this. He's a king who, according to the beginning of the account in John 6, he's a king who can do what in verse 2? He heals the sick. And then he's a king who can provide food from basically nothing. Right? This is precisely who you want in charge. But this isn't the kingdom he came to rule over. This is not his ball. Or this is not his game. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you look also, he's already got a following, right? That's what a king means. He's got power, so to speak, and he's God's anointed. They can identify that. He can do things that other people cannot do, and that's what they're used to, is appointing kings that are God's anointed kings. So in that sense, he fits the bill, so to speak.
He fits the bill better than everybody. What's his lineage? He's of David, right? So not only is he powerful, he comes from the right lineage. He is the actual son of David. We're going to make him king, right? This is not the kingdom he came to have a part of. You remember what he told Pilate later? My kingdom is not of this world. If it was, my servants would fight. They're getting ready for the fight here. And so he leaves, right? He squashes all of that. He says that wasn't what he was about. If there was a moment to ever be tempted to be king, this is it, right? Because he has the people's support. He's not going to have it for long. What's going to happen later in John 6? They're going to run off. He's going to teach something difficult to hear about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, and they're going to run, right? They're going to leave. Verse 66, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. It reminds you of the verse early, I think it's, I remember where it is, John 1 or 2, where Jesus says that he refused to give himself to the people, or he refused to sort of go along with what they wanted because he knew what was in the heart of man. Right? The same people who wanted to make him king in chapter 6 also fled from him in chapter 6. Right? He understood that dynamic. This previews the kingdom, though. All right. Tell me what in the story points to Passover. This isn't Passover, but there are moments. There are similarities. All right? Give me one of them. He does something here that's exactly what he does in the context of Passover.
Blesses the bread and passes.
Yeah, let me read it again and tell me if this sounds familiar. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. Does that sound familiar? It sounds exactly like the order of events in Luke 23 and in 1 Corinthians 11 and other, and Paul's retelling of what's probably Luke's version of the Last Supper, right? There's a similar thing going on here, all right? What else? Anything else in the story point to you to the idea of Passover? Read John 6 and verse 4. We just sort of read over this and probably didn't catch it on the way by. It's Passover season. It's at hand. It's about to take place. Now, this isn't Passover. They haven't gathered to do the thing, okay? But it's that, it's that time of year. They're getting ready to do this. So in the context of Passover, Jesus takes bread, blesses it, breaks it, gives it to his disciples, who then do what with it? Who then pass it out to the regular people. You see what's happening? It's another version of Jesus feeding the crowds. But he's feeding them through his disciples. And it just so happens that the crowds are broken into little groups of 50 and 100. This could point to military formations, but I think it might point to something else. It points to congregations. Because what's happening? Jesus takes it, gives it to his disciples. His disciples are going to go and then distribute it to little groups of followers in different places, right? And they're not going to run out. In fact, they're going to have so much that they have left over. No one's going to miss out on this, right? No one's going to come up short. There's not a group of people somewhere later that are going to be dying to know what Jesus said and what he taught, because the disciples will bring it to them, right? It points forward to that. And that sort of, again, speaks to what the apostles would be called to do before too much longer, right? They would have to take what Jesus gives them and take it to the people and feed them, right? That would be their role as apostles moving forward. And this story kind of prefigures that. Yeah.
Obviously, we know God can do anything, so I'm going to preface with that. But I find it fascinating. You're out in the middle of nowhere, no preparation, and there's 12 empty baskets laying around. I just always found that fascinating. It's just a detail.
Why do you suppose there's 12?
Well, 12 apostles. But I just think it's fascinating that they're just there. I don't know.
Well, what do you do with them? I mean, you carry them around, have them for lunch left over? I don't know. You do something with them. Yeah.
What he did also makes it very clear that a miracle was done. If you think about it, because of the distribution of the people, and it all didn't come from one place, it all didn't come back, but from 12, and by distributing it out and feeding everybody, it's clear that a miracle was done. There's no other way that you could come out of this, come to that conclusion. No skeptic could come to any other conclusion.
Have you, has anybody seen The Chosen, their representation of the miracle, how they did it? I've always wondered this, right? What did it look like live? Because you think, okay, I have a piece of bread. I break it. I give you some of it. I keep some of it. And then I eat my piece. Does it magically get bigger in the next person's hand? And what about how exactly? you wonder like what that would have looked like happening live. And the show The Chosen, their answer to it was that the food multiplied before it was passed out, like in the baskets themselves. I don't know. The text doesn't say that. But they're at least trying to work out what it looked like for it to go on, right? How? I don't know, but it's fascinating to think about.
It's all speculation, but I envision myself that Jesus is reaching in the basket and he pulls out and fills up this one, and he pulls out and fills up, and he just keeps pulling out and filling them up, and nobody, that's the miracle being performed, is he's reaching in and getting more. It never ends, just like the oil never ends for the widow.
That's where I was headed next, right? This is the last thing I was going to say about the story. This isn't the first time this sort of thing has happened, right? There's the jar of oil in Elisha and it's not the Shunammite woman, it's widow of Zarephath, is that right? Sidon, yeah, I think that's right. One of those, I have to go back and look at it again, but she has a jar of oil. She's going to sell it so that her and her son can have one last meal and then die. I mean, because it's famine season. And she's pouring and pouring and pouring until every vessel in the house is full, a multiplication type thing. He does this here. It's not the only time he does this miracle, which is even more fascinating. He does it again later for 4,000 people. And then he brings up that story to the apostles moving forward. Speaking of them, all right, let's look at how they responded, or rather how they didn't respond. This is Matthew 14. Let's look at verse 22. Because in Matthew, and I didn't look real carefully, I think in all the other ones it follows the account pretty closely. Luke is the one that leaves it out. But Matthew 14, let's read that version because I think it's the longer of the three. Okay, Matthew 14, beginning in 22. If I could get 22 to 27, and then we'll do 28 and following after that. Okay, who wants to take over for us? Matthew 14, beginning in verse 22. All right, back in the back.
Straightway Jesus constrained the disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, It is a spirit. And they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid.
Okay, 28 through 33. Good.
And Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. He said, Come. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God.
Okay. Who else has called Jesus Son of God previous to this that we've studied? Peter, right? You are the Son of the living God, right? Who else? It's kind of rare, right? And in one case, sort of not who you want to hear it from. The demons kept saying he was the Son of God, right? Or versions of that phrase, right? Son of the Most High God. They knew who he was. And now here, everyone in the boat worships him, saying, Truly you're the Son of God, right? Give me an Old Testament story where a group of people see something incredible and immediately begin worshiping God in a boat. It's Jonah and the pagans in the boat, right? It's not Jonah because he's on the way down.
He's still in the boat because Jonah's not in the boat.
Right. The pagans left in the boat see a miracle happen. The water calms, and they immediately begin worshiping God. So an echo of an old story. And how does the Jonah account run parallel to there's something that happens in that story that just happened here. Not just the men in the boat. What about the guy in the water? How was Jonah's faith, do you imagine? Not so great, because God told him go to Nineveh, and he said no. And he tried to run off, and they threw him out, and he sank. What happened to Peter and his faith when it broke? He was in the water, and he sank, right? So there's another sort of echo of an old story. Back up to verse 27. Jesus says, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Who is it that's normally telling men, don't be afraid in Scripture? It comes from who most often? Angels. Angels are the ones telling him, don't be afraid. Remember, the angels tell the shepherds, don't be afraid. Is it Matthew 1? Yeah. Matthew 2, Matthew 2. All throughout the Old Testament, every time someone interacts with an angel or, the presence of God, it's always, don't be afraid. You see Jesus in the same sort of thing, don't be afraid, right? It is I, don't be afraid. They were to not be afraid based on what? His identity. It's me, he says of himself. Don't be afraid. I'm afraid. It says there in verse 26, they were terrified. They said, it's a ghost. Why did they think they'd saw a ghost?
Because people don't normally walk on the water.
Real people don't do this. Spirits, like the Spirit of the Lord in Genesis 1, hovers over the surface of the water. Here we have the Son of God doing what? Walking on the surface of the water. You see, there's echoes of old stories here. But they understood real people don't do this. Real people sink, not come walking to them across the water. Again, another account where you always wonder, what did that look like? Right? Did like the water become ice that he was walking on? I don't mean literally ice, but did it stop the moment he walked on it? Was the water still moving and he was literally moving with it? I don't know. However it happened, it was they knew what it was. And they were terrified of it. Why? Plus, right, this also points to Jesus isn't just your normal everyday human being. What's the normal human reaction to, they've already left in the boat, I need to meet them? What the people do in the story before this? Went around the edge. He says, no, I'll just walk out there to them.
According to the text here, they're in the middle. There's no way to get to them other than to go out on the water.
Yeah, he didn't jump on the jet ski and run out there and then hop off and then walk to. He set out walking himself. How does Jesus walk against a wind faster than a boat can sail against it? It's the more you think about it, the more just outrageous this story is, but it's true. When does he come to them? Fourth watch of the night. So that's...
as I recall, it was 2 hours of watch, wasn't it?
It's either 2 or 3. Well, I don't remember if it's broken up into 5 watches or 4. I think it's 4. Right? So this is like the last one before daybreak. So somewhere, in the time of the morning where no one needs to be awake. Right? It's nothing but bad things happen between 3 and 6 in the morning. Unless you're having a baby. Then sometimes that happens, but everything else, not so great. They were a long way. The wind was against them, right? And when they got back into the boat, the wind ceased. This is the second time that's happened so far, right? The first time Jesus was asleep in the boat, and he calls it to stop. The second time, Jesus and Peter climbed back into the boat, and immediately it ceased again, right? Okay, details. What did he force the apostles to do? I think force is the right word. Matthew version says he made them get into the boat and go. Right? He compelled them to leave. You can understand why they wouldn't want to. Right? Brian, did you have a...
Yeah. I've never really made this connection on the feeding of the 5,000 and the walking in the water. But I think this was more about the disciples than it was about the people. The reason I say that is in, at the end of Mark 6, verse 52, it says, "For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened." And then when you look back, it's interesting that they didn't have enough. It's all about faith. He is proving to them to look what I can do. I can feed these 5,000 people with this little amount of loaves. These people are going to go away from me, right, here in a couple chapters, whatever it is. But he's proving to them, when they freaked out when they saw him on the water, it says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" I think the whole point of what he's getting at in both of these things is just, how can you not see? I'm showing you who I am, what I'm capable of. I need you to just trust me that I can feed these 5,000 people. I know, when you think about that connection between a good shepherd you talked about a minute ago, he didn't identify himself. They thought he was a ghost, so they didn't know exactly who it was. He said, "It is I." He didn't say, "Hey, it's Jesus." He said, "It is I," right? His sheep heard his voice. They understood that that was their shepherd, so to speak. But yet he still asked them, "What about your faith? Why did you not have enough faith to believe that it was me that would walk out here? Who else would walk out here?"
Yeah.
I never really made that connection. I think it was all about proving that to the disciples, not really the people.
And what's so fascinating about Jesus really, he's questioning about their faith based on the thing he just did. What did they fail to realize? He's not just Elisha, right? If he were, now that would be incredible if he were, but he's so much more than that, right? And the different details and the elements in the story tie things together in the past that really point to his being something beyond a prophet. There's one more of these. This one is interesting. Did you notice what Jesus intended to do when he walked out there? What does it say that he intended to do?
Go on past.
He meant to go on past them. That seems odd, right? He came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. What would that be in reference to? Why? He meant to just meet them on the other side? I mean, but they just they happened to see him? I mean, obviously this was planned. There's a verse in Job. Listen to how this sounds. Job is talking about God. This is Job 9. He really begins in verses 2 and 3 and 4. He's speaking about who God is. In verse 5, it's he who removes mountains. Verse 6, who shakes the pillars out of place. Verse 11. Job, talking about God, says, "Behold, he passes by me, and I see him not. He moves on, but I do not perceive him. Behold, he snatches away. Who can turn him back? Who will say to him, what are you doing?" The same God who stretches out the heavens and tramples on the waves of the sea, who does great things beyond searching out and marvelous things beyond number. They and everyone else didn't perceive exactly who he was, right? They didn't get far enough along in the process. And I don't think you can blame them for that. This is too monumental of a thing to just pick up and run with, right? Plus, you don't just run around saying, "I found God," or the Messiah. That's a dangerous thing to do. So they would have been predisposed to have been very suspicious. And on top of the fact that just seeing it live in front of you would have been just outrageously, just mind-boggling, right, to have to go through. Yeah.
Question. This is an aside, really, but I meant to ask it earlier. In Mark 6, 30, it says the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away to yourselves to a desert place and rest a while." Don't you find that terribly understated? I mean, they've been gone in all the directions. You come back, and he just says, they told him everything happened. He said, "Come on, let's go." I found it fascinating when I read it again.
Yeah, let's go relax somewhere. Oh, by the way, for those of you like me who have trouble with crowds of people, relaxing meant going to a desolate place. Yes. Positive, right? It's a good thing there. But you can understand, right? It's away from the stresses, away from the job, you might say, just for a little bit. Come away and just let's sit and talk and just not do this anymore. And yet, it doesn't happen. That also mirrors what happened to Jesus. Jesus tried to do this and the people chased him. Same thing would happen with his followers, right? They are following him in more ways than one.
That's the one that I've always thought about. That they killed John. You just want to be by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when the crowd show up, it said he had compassion.
Yep.
I'm afraid I would have lashed out. I would
He's-
have been angry. There are times when we want to be left alone.
Yep. And he still put their need over his own. I mean, if there's not an application here, I'm not sure what it would be, but he put them over himself, right? Yeah, their hearts were hardened. Interesting. They did not understand about the loaves, for their hearts were hardened, right? Can you think of an account later where they also failed to understand the lesson of the bread? This same sort of thing happens again later in the story, where Jesus gets on to them because they failed to understand what was really going on behind the whole making of the bread. You remember this one?
I don't know if this is where you're going with it, but I thought of Luke 22 when he's actually understanding they're coming together from the Lord's Supper, and then they break out into a discussion of who is the greatest. They do not understand the intensity of what is going on.
Right.
And when you mention
They're still missing it. They're still cloudy, right?
right, this also references when you think about the parables, the parable of the sower, when it talks about how they did not understand, even though they had ears to hear and eyes to see. They reference back to Isaiah 6. He is reminding them, and this is that same idea of hardening of the heart. That's the reason you can't understand this, because it continues on and says, if you turn from your ways, then I will heal you. And just that idea of coming to him and recognizing who he is, that's how you'll be able to understand, to hear, and to see. But until that happens, your heart will stay hard.
Yep. Exactly right. You got to come to him to be able to learn. Yes, sir.
You know, this phrase is interesting because I think about what it would have been. You know what? If I were them, it'd be easy to miss it too. And I understand why. Think about this. What were they doing during the feeding of the 5,000? They were busy distributing bread and
Right.
you know, and they brought up 12 baskets, so they were busy collecting it up. So they were so busy involved in the moment of just trying to do the physical things to make this happen. They didn't have time to reflect on what it was they truly had seen.
The just last thing, and we'll be done. The story I'm referencing is in Matthew 16. Jesus is trying to teach his disciples in verse 6, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they think it's about the fact that we don't have any bread. They're still stuck on that bread thing. And he actually brings up specifically this event. Oh, you of little faith, why are you discussing about the fact we have no bread? Do you not yet perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000? Right. I'm not talking about that, Jesus says, and they're still stuck on that. Okay, that will get better later, but at that point in the story, they're not there yet. All right. I think I put. Yep. There's nothing there. Like I said, next Sunday, Lord willing, we'll have our books by then, and then we'll have some rotating teachers, so get a chance to sort of get some other people studying and looking at that. And Lord willing, at some point, we'll pick back up the rest of the lesson. We'll see when. All right, thank you all.